Okay, so she's upset
Sorry,
because
guys.
it's hard to be so famous. And she's upset because it was very expensive to live in the White House. They had to pay for their own food. Who has to pay for their own food? What kind of world is this? And just as soon as you start working up your sympathy glands for Michelle Obama, you see her just recently out on Steven Spielberg's yacht, cruising around the Mediterranean, while she literally wants you to.
Starts like a whisper that could shake the polished legacy of one of America's most famous power couples, Barack and Michelle Obama, for years. Media painted them as a symbol of unity and hope. But now insiders are questioning if that image was more strategic branding than authentic belief. And this shift in conversation did not come from a random leak or rumor. It started when Barack Obama went on a 2024 campaign stage and spoke sharply about Black men's support in elections, saying they needed to stand in racial alignment. But just a short time later, he backed a white Democrat candidate over a Black Republican woman running for governor in Virginia, and people online immediately pointed out the contrast because the same man who stressed racial solidarity seemed to choose the party line instead of the identity line, and that moment made critics ask if some of these narratives are more about political power than the values they claim to represent.
Now, personally for me, if I were able to run for a third term, Michelle would divorce me. So, so it's useful that I don't have that choice to make.
We can see how that moment hit like a crack in the public image because the media tried to spin it as just strategy. But people inside political circles felt there was a deeper contradiction, and that contrast made audiences ask, how could a former president speak about racial unity and representation on one stage and then later throw his support toward another candidate who did not match that same emotional message? So social media began comparing both moments side by side, and it created a narrative that felt more calculated than inspiring. And as the summer moved on, even supporters online started questioning if the language about representation had been based on real belief or if it was more of a political lever designed to hold power in place. And whispers behind closed doors painted a picture of a very controlled machine where endorsements and headlines were managed with specific outcomes in mind, because if the right candidate succeeded, it would reinforce the influence of his legacy, and if they failed, there was still room to say the effort had been made. So either way, the storyline stayed centered around his impact. And now that careful branding built over many years is being tested because scrutiny from the public is growing, and the image that once felt untouchable suddenly feels vulnerable to questions that are louder than ever before.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, you know, the thing about what I learned in those 8 years is that home is where we make it. And we were in the White House for 8 years, but it wasn't the house. It was us in it. It was our values and our love for each other. And we just moved that to another house. So.
And then attention shifts toward Michelle. Because while Barack is moving across political battlegrounds, people online begin noticing how often Michelle is not there. And every absence gets read like a signal. When Barack went alone to the funeral of Jimmy Carter, the whispers started again. And when he showed up solo to other high-profile events, the pattern became harder for some to ignore, and the conversation exploded even more after that softly lit birthday photo. Because instead of a warm, candid moment, many viewers said it felt more like public relations management than genuine intimacy. And soon, multiple outlets from podcasts to political blogs began discussing if the couple were just moving in two different worlds at this stage of their lives, while others suggested maybe her lack of appearances was simply about personal boundaries or exhaustion. And then months later, Michelle released her new project, The Look, a high-end coffee table book filled with curated images of her wardrobe to celebrate style and self-presentation. And critics pointed out how unusual it felt to see her lean back into spotlight culture, while also talking about discomfort with fame. And they questioned if that contrast showed a deeper tension between privacy and branding. And now the online debate is less about their projects themselves, and more about whether carefully managed appearances can still control the public narrative the same way they used to.
Now, this is something else going on. That is a good problem to have. To be very rich and very famous does not solve all of your issues, but it is generally quite a good thing to be. I mean, I remember when I was much younger hearing a movie star, I forget who it was, complain that people would come up to him at dinner and ask for autographs or whatever. And my view was, look, that's kind of what goes along with all of the money and fame and adoration.
We can trace this same contrast throughout Michelle's post-White House years, because she often speaks publicly about wanting more privacy and less attention, but then she also participates in major media projects with millions of eyes watching, and she has said she feels tired of being judged for her outfits, but then she releases a book filled with hundreds of carefully selected images, showcasing her style, and even her captions online feel very curated, packed with the popular terms that connect to social themes that everyone recognizes today. And some commentators say this is not simple vanity, but more about strengthening a public identity, because when Michelle talks about personal struggle or the pressures of image, those moments draw huge engagement, and the conversation becomes part of her cultural impact. And online voices describe how every statement can turn into content, and every emotional reflection becomes a moment that shapes the larger brand people have built around her.
I have something super fun for you to discuss now, and
Okay.
I'm sad for Rich that he won't get to weigh in on it, but you're going to be really honored. Michelle Obama, as you know, has got a podcast, and she's putting it to good use. I mean, she's really working through a lot of her feelings about the United States, about her husband, about her children. P.S. The answer on all three of those is she can't stand them. She hated motherhood. She can't stand her marriage, and she's not too keen on the United States.
Conservative voices on talk shows and satellite radio have recently used Michelle's own words as new talking points, because when she admitted in a podcast episode that there were years where she struggled in her marriage, people online connected that with her noticeable absences from major public events, and that combination restarted the conversation around whether the Obama marriage has gone through real strain, and commentators began suggesting that the couple's public appearances feel less frequent and more curated than they used to, and that their moments of affection seem more staged than natural. And for longtime supporters who fell in love with their story back in the early days, this shift feels confusing, because now the political tension around Barack's endorsement decisions and the pop culture energy behind Michelle's creative projects almost feel like mirror images. The politics uses moral framing, and the lifestyle content uses personal struggle to generate engagement, and together this keeps the Obama brand relevant. Even while people online question how authentic that relevance is, because if Michelle publicly speaks about how tough the White House years were while Barack still works behind the scenes in national politics, it creates a narrative that looks divided, and sources in the media often say the two spend long stretches focused on different worlds, with Michelle deep in West Coast creative networks and Barack still moving inside Washington circles.
More fuel on the fire that there's a potential, maybe a divorce or some sort of rockiness going on in the Obamas' relationship. They both posted these mirrored, very choreographed Valentine's Day messages on X.
Every birthday post, every stage laugh, every coordinated appearance looks like it is meant to project stability and calm for the public, and people online notice the timing, because these displays often appear immediately after new gossip or rumor breaks. And when the internet started speculating about Barack and his Hollywood circle, the couple's social media feeds suddenly filled with matching affectionate posts. And when Michelle got backlash for her book launch, Barack showed up at her signing right on cue, cameras pointed right at them, and it all comes across like a carefully directed performance, because the Obamas know their image still carries value and influence. And behind the bright smiles, some insiders say there is a much more serious tone, with private conversations about legacy control messaging and how to protect their public narrative from looking fractured. And even in broader political commentary, some analysts online have speculated that there are complicated tensions and alliances between Democratic power factions, and those conversations often include theories about which relationships are friendly and which are strained. But the truth is, most of that discourse is based on interpretation, and the only thing viewers can see with certainty is how carefully managed every public moment around the Obamas now appears.
And that's the thing is, so the Bidens and the Obamas hate each other because Michelle Obama is very good friends with Hunter Biden's ex-wife. So that's led to a significant problem where they don't like Hunter. And if you don't like Hunter, Joe doesn't like you. Yeah. So I would not be surprised if Holmes is right on with this of like, oh, well, why don't we do this?
It's like, oh, man, you give us problems, maybe you can have a problem.
And that brings us back to where this unraveling began, with the illusion of authenticity, because Barack once spoke constantly about transparency and change, and Michelle spoke about honesty and grace. But recent headlines, ranging from campaign endorsements to pop culture press tours, create a very different picture. And to many observers, it looks less like a love story and more like a partnership held together by mutual benefit, where he builds narratives about race to maintain political influence, and she shapes narratives about struggle to maintain cultural reach, and both benefit from the appearance of moral authority. And as people online point out examples that feel like contradictions, the question gets louder. How long can a public image built around virtue survive if audiences begin reading those same gestures as ambition? And what happens if the public stops believing the story that made them cultural icons in the first place?